Hello, welcome to this DCS AH-64D tutorial. In this video, we will cover utilizing George, your Hellfire missiles, your cannon, and your NVS modes. To begin, your NVS modes are utilized on the switch or your keybinds. With the switch in the off position, you have your standard helmet. In the middle position, the normal position, you now have a night vision mode on your helmet, which you can change the brightness and intensity of utilizing these knobs that we talked about earlier. In the up fixed position, it is giving us a fixed view out the front of our aircraft. No matter where we look, it's as if we were looking straight ahead out the aircraft. This is useful for if we're heads down in our cockpit, setting waypoints, working on displays, or what have you. We'll still be able to tell what our aircraft is doing and fly it without actually looking outside. For now, I will turn this off. On our helmet, we see a couple of things. On the bottom, we see an M0.7. This corresponds to the manual range that we set, in this case 700, during startup. The M means you are in manual range mode, and if you changed it to A, it will change to an A in the bottom, and depending on where you look, that means the aircraft will try to calculate the range of your helmet. You will utilize the center cross as your aiming reticle for your cannon. On the bottom right, you will see two lines of text. The top is what your co-pilot gunner has selected, and the bottom is what you have selected. So I have the cannon selected with 300 rounds, and George, the co-pilot gunner, has the missile selected, and he is currently fixed to this center dotted cross. I will go ahead and arm my plane and reselect my guns. In order to utilize your guns, you're going to need to put your weapons trigger guard to open when you are in the air. To control George, we will hit the hide show button. George AI helper interface show hide. And while that interface is open, we will control George utilizing these keybinds we covered in the controls tutorial. So now that we have our ground override and our armament turned on, we can open up George, do a short press left to tell him to cycle weapons.
Gun lost.
He will tell us he has selected the weapon by WASing the gun, the weapon action switch for the gun. I will tell him short press left again to select the Hellfire. If you had rockets, it would cycle through those. On the right of the George display, you will see LOBL and TRAJ-DIR. This means you are in lowball mode with a direct trajectory. If we did a short press right, we would change the missile mode to low altitude. If we did a long press right, we would change the fire mode.
Missile set to low.
Long press right again.
Missiles up high.
Long press right again.
We're up direct.
Short press right. We want George to fire in lowball direct trajectory mode. Currently in the Apache, if you are in low alt mode utilizing a lower high shot, he does not always maintain the track or fire his laser. that will come later in the Apache's development. This bottom option that you see says unslaved. If we look somewhere and press short press down,
Roger, ceasefire.
we will tell George to reset back to center. If we look somewhere and we do a short press up,
And slaving.
we will
Noted
tell
slaving.
George to slave his view to where our cursor is and look for a target. We can see that he has moved where he is looking on the video feed behind our weapon display. This will be more clear when we're in the air and I'm selecting targets. If we wanted him to reset, we would press down short,
Roger, ceasefire.
and he will reset back to the center slaved position. One thing to note about George is you do not want to rush him. If you give him an order through his display, wait for him to finish it before giving him another order. I have found that if you press the buttons too fast and you start cycling through things before he is finished, it is possible for him to break and to hang up and no longer be able to fire your Hellfire missiles. Alright, let's head over some targets and see what this looks like in action. I'm going to head over here to these targets at Gifrati. So I'll utilize what we covered during the map tutorial, the navigation tutorial. I already have a waypoint there, but I'll place another just for demonstration. Point, add, Gifrati. I now have waypoint 8, route, direct, 8. Close out route, deselect freeze. And now my home plate is over by those targets, so I'm going to fly over there now. I'll go ahead and select my guns. Generally, as a pilot, you're always going to have your guns equipped, and George will have Hellfires equipped if you have them. We'll cover rockets on a later tutorial video. I'm going to give it some power and get a little higher to get over these trees. And I'm also going to get myself in a nose-tail trim so that I can easily fly between obstacles and not worry about my tail hitting something. Once again, I can tell I'm in a nose-tail trim because my velocity vector was centered, and the ball on the bottom is pushed off to the side. Additionally, this line is towards the straight up position. Remember, because we set the direct to waypoint, all I have to do is fly towards this home plate symbol, and I will fly towards the waypoint that I set. One thing to note, on your weapon page, is this option on R5. LRFD first, and if you click it, it will change to last. This is the laser reflection. It is whether you are going to be firing on the first reflection or the last reflection of whatever target George is lasing. If George is not hitting a target, or if it is behind something, you might switch it to last. If your target is in front of something, you will change it to first. Going to go ahead and make sure my acquisition source is on TEDS, as we covered in startup. And I'm just verifying all of my equipment before I get into a combat zone. Every time you deselect your guns and reselect them, if you want an automatic ranging mode, you will have to select man range and type in the A and press enter. As you can see down here, the plane is calculating a range based on where I'm looking. So if I turn off my weapons trigger guard, if I look at a target and pull my trigger, I will fire the cannon, and you can see the smoke hitting. I'll zoom in a little bit so it's easier to see once I clear these wires. You can tell that it is not a precise weapon. There is a lot of Kentucky windage involved, so it is meant as an AoE that you will walk onto your target as you fire. Alright, I can see the targets out there, so I'm going to creep in, establish a hover, and then we can start talking about how to utilize George. Alright, I'm going to slow down and start to get into a battle position. Dropping my collective and pulling back on the nose, on the stick, raising my nose. Going to trim out. As I get slower, I'm going to trim out again. Alright, this is close enough to effectively demonstrate George, so I'm going to gain some altitude to see over these trees. Remember, if you want to hover, you will keep the circle in the center of your helmet in the center of the cross. Alright, if we want George to look for a target, we will making sure our George interface is open. We will look in the target area and do a short press forward.
Slaving.
He will tell us slaving, and he will look for targets. At this point, we will get a list on the bottom of our helmet, and we can cycle through this list utilizing the George control up and down. As we cycle through the targets, we will see his cross changing between the targets so we know who he is looking at. Additionally, we can utilize the display on our weapon page to see who he is looking at. If we see a target we want him to fire on, say this truck out here, we will select it in the list and press George Command Right.
Lazed and stored.
He will say lazed and stored, and you will see a large box appear on your screen. If it is a small box, it means you are out of range and unable to fire. At this point, George is telling us that he's good to go, so all I have to do is give George authorization with the George OK button.
Firing.
He will say firing, and then fire his missile. Try to keep yourself as steady as possible, not wobble around like that. Because right now there is no tracking capability in the AH-64. George has to manually compensate for
Target destroyed.
all of your movements manually. So if you're moving around, you might have a hard time keeping up. Now, if we wanted to look for another target, we could look and press short press up again,
Deslaving.
and he'll look in that area. If we saw something, if we didn't see anything we wanted to hit, instead of selecting it by pressing right on the George control, we could press left to close the menu. At this point, he will turn back to center. So let's go ahead and find a target. Short
And
press
slaving.
up.
Deslaving.
It's giving us the list, and the list is in order of priority of the target. Let's see if I can hit this AAA
Lazed
emplacement.
and stored.
Alright, so now you see I have the small box. That means that target is out of range. Because that target is out of range, it looks like I'm right on the edge of the range. Oh, yep, it keeps cycling between large and small box, so I'm not quite good to shoot at it. I'm going to look for another target. Instead of pressing short press up to tell him to slave over to where I'm looking and look again, I can do a long press down, and that will bring up the list that he just had open. And I can cycle through it again for a target. Let's say this truck. I'll select it with George right.
Target is stored.
I have the large box, so I can fire by giving him authorization. And you can see what he's looking at on your display.
Target destroyed.
Alright, let's try and hit that AAA emplacement. I will long press down to bring up my list, make sure the AAA emplacement is selected, and
Target
press
stored.
George right.
Engaging.
Right here, I have the box, but it's right on that edge, so even though I tell him to fire, and he says engaging, he is not firing. So in that case, I'm not going to need to get a little bit closer. As you feel comfortable, you don't strictly need to be in a hover to utilize these weapons. You just need to be even and consistent with your movements so George can compensate. I don't want to get too close or else it will fire at me. Alright, so my missile hit behind, so I'm going to change the first to last, and hopefully that will have better luck.
Firing.
I can't see through this pillar, so I'm going to turn on my night vision to normal. And now it allows me to see through this pillar. Going to adjust the gains. And change this back to first and see if that has any better luck.
Engaging.
Now that I'm able to see again, I'm going to turn off my display. And hopefully George takes this guy out. And he missed again, and I'm being fired on.
Roger, engaging.
I could set up a battle position and try and take him out from a hover, but I'm going to experiment and see what I can get away with. And I strongly encourage you to do the same as you're learning George. Because George is failing me, I'm going to put my cursor over the target and utilize my cannon.
Those are good hits.
And destroyed. Goes to show the power of the cannon to engage threats that either George is not capable of, or that you feel you might be able to take out in a more effective manner. So I can look over here, walk in my shots. If it's being blocked by the pillar, once again I can turn on my night vision. I can look through the plane and fire. And adjust my brightness as necessary utilizing those knobs or control bindings if you have them available. On the bottom of this display, you will see EL limit. This can say a variety of things, depending on how you're looking. Azimuth limit. This is saying you are looking in an area that your gun cannot fire. Just small bursts and walk it in. Easy as that. If you do a long press up for George, you will see the display turns green, and that means you do not have to give him authorization to launch his weapon. He will fire at will. I strongly recommend that you do not allow him to fire at will, because he is extremely wasteful. Do a long press up again to change it back to yellow, and that means he requires your authorization to fire the weapons. Here, I will go ahead and try and turn into and select the target close range for the Hellfires.
Deslaving.
And you'll see my acquisition mode change back to fixed, so I can't see what he's looking at with that cross. I will come back down to acquisition, TADS.
Blazed and stored. Roger, engaging. Target destroyed.
A short press up on the target
And slaving.
is going to slave. I will
Target is
select
stored.
that target,
Roger, engaging.
authorization.
Target destroyed.
So utilizing George in conjunction with your gun during an attack run can be an extremely powerful and devastating tool. I'll go ahead and trim out here. And the George authorization button, once again, is consent to fire under AH-64D pilot. That covers all of the basics of utilizing George, your Hellfires, and your cannon. Once again, if we put the NVS mode to fixed, it gives us a view out the front of our aircraft. So if we're heads down in these displays selecting things, making waypoints, I can focus on this display and fly my aircraft without ever looking outside. Adjusting the brightness as needed. So I could be down here setting the waypoint for the next area I want to go to without ever looking outside and still being able to fly this aircraft effectively. Remember, the more accurately you bore sight your headset, the more accurate your cannon and this helmet will be. Alright, thanks for watching.